All right, so we're here on Well Talk, and I am fortunate to have Dr. Hector Rodriguez here with me from Amen Clinics, Miami, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, we're coming in from the 305, and I'm super excited to have you on here. Thank you for taking the time to not only chat with me, but also give your expertise and insights to listeners. Really grateful for you to come on here and chat.
No, anytime. Thank you for having me, really. This is really fun.
Cool. Likewise. Yeah. Definitely gonna have a good conversation. And you know, is it Dr. Hector, Dr. Rodriguez? How do you usually get
You know, I always like whenever I hear Rodriguez, that sounds
yeah.
like my dad or like he. So I always
Yeah,
like just call me Dr. Hector because it sounds a
Dr.
little
Hector.
more like. And when I was a high school teacher, I had my students just call me Mr. Hector. So
Okay.
when I became a doctor, I was like, why not?
That works. So Dr. Hector, can you tell listeners a little bit just about where you currently are with your practice and just what you're doing right now? I think that would be really cool for people to get some insight as to, what you're doing over there in Miami and in Amen Clinics.
Yeah, so I mean, if you know anything about aiming clinics, one of the things that we're known for is doing spec brain imaging.
Hmm.
This is basically a type of brain imaging, a little bit different than the other ones, like MRI and CT. With a
Mm.
spec, you can see what the brain is doing, so like brain function, as
Uh-huh.
opposed to just brain anatomy, like what it physically looks like.
Mm.
Um, and the revolutionary person there is Dr. Amen.
Yeah.
He's been doing this for many years. We have offices all over the U.S. Obviously, me being bilingual, I see patients from Mexico, Latin America, South, everywhere, Spain,
Cool.
which is really cool. So we have
Yeah.
people come over, they get their brain scans, and then my job is to interpret the scans based on their symptoms that they're experiencing.
Mm.
So that's the main thing that I do. I'm in the South Florida office, and
Okay.
it's really fun. We're having a good time, learning a lot, and trying to revolutionize psychiatry.
Yeah. I love that. I think you saying that just kind of captures the whole essence of even what like Dr. Amen has been trying to do for so long and then revolutionize the way people look at psychiatry and just the brain itself, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about mental illness. It's
Yeah.
about brain illness or brain
Mm.
health,
Uh-huh.
When we call someone mental, right? We immediately
Hmm.
put like that negative stigma, like
Right.
something wrong with you. And one of my favorite things that I always hear Dr. Amen say is no one is dumb or stupid,
Mm.
you know, or bad. Those are
Mm.
those are not good words to name someone who has a brain illness. And one of the cool things that we see with brain scans actually is sometimes we see minor brain injuries that the person
Uh-huh.
had. And there's certain parts of the brain that control your reactions, for example. So
Hmm.
if that's been physically hurt, that person has a hard time controlling their reactions.
Wow.
So then you see them in paper, they're angry, they're irritable, they're
Yeah.
easily like just upset, and they
Uh-huh.
have a temporal lobe injury.
Wow.
And we don't know unless we look.
Yeah. And that's what a revolutionary concept, really, to just let's look at the brain, right? And study in more depth what's going on there.
Right.
Not just know the parts, right? But let's
Yeah.
look at what's going on and the activity. And I love seeing not only your posts, but even Dr. Amen's posts and the brain scans that are there and how it shows different activity happening in different parts of the brain. And yeah, it's super insightful for people as well.
Yeah. No, and one of the cool things about it is whenever I have my patient come in and they bring their spouse, their mom,
Hmm.
their kids, I love explaining it to them there because
Hmm.
the family starts understanding more what's going on.
Yeah.
This is not just someone who is let's stick to being irritable, right? This is not
Yeah.
just someone who's angry all the time. Is that they have
Yeah.
a brain injury
Mm.
or they have mold exposure or some
Mm.
other toxin in their brain.
Hmm.
So there is a whole shift in how the person within the family dynamics is treated.
Yeah.
So this is no longer like, oh, this is that bad kid.
Wow.
This
Yeah,
is
it's
a
true.
kid who has a brain damage. There's something
Yeah.
wrong in his brain. That's why he's acting like that. So I
Uh-huh.
love when they're present. Um, it it also connects the family, and
Hmm.
there's healing that happens not just in the individual, but in the entire family nucleus, which is kind of fascinating when that happens. So
Definitely. I think like you even just said, with knowledge comes power there. When somebody has an understanding and it's kind of broken down for them in a way where it's like that behavior is linked to something that's happened, and it brings out more insight for people to know, hey, this is how we can help, in this area. And
right.
that's so cool. What awesome work. That's so cool to be able to say that you get to do that.
Yeah, no, I'm blessed
Yeah.
to be able to be working. And then, as a psychiatrist in that group, it's really cool because you're surrounded by really smart psychiatrists and
Mm,
share information. So there's a huge collaborative team spirit within the whole clinics,
that's
um,
so cool.
which is amazing. And then there's a psychiatrist, but then there's also the integrative doctors, um,
Mm,
which just changes how you treat some of the physical symptoms that come from brain problems. Um,
mm-hmm.
so I've learned a lot, and I'm so grateful to be here. And then also, what we have in store in the future, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Question two, like how long have you been at Amen Clinics?
It's now gonna be. It was August of 22, so
Okay.
it's been a good 2 years, two and some.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Cool. Well, this is a really awesome, I think, listening experience for listeners to get this information from you firsthand. And then also what we had talked about before with highlighting, so many people are talking about resilience and confidence building and how they can continue to maybe strengthen their resilience and build their confidence. What does that look like in maybe your approach, or what are some recommendations that you would give to somebody that is like, hey, how can I improve this, or where can I find ways to strengthen that?
yeah. So, obviously, the first thing I say is, well, let's look at what your brain is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Where's their deficiency in function?
Mm-hmm.
Um, where is just maybe it's a little sleepy. You know,
Okay.
usually it's the frontal lobe. Um,
Mm-hmm.
then those people have um, just problems with decision making. So then you
Mm-hmm.
think about, someone who has, let's say, just low confidence, right?
Yeah.
They have this internal battle of how should I act in a social setting. So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like they can't make their decision, right?
Right.
And then another part that I particularly love and I'm very interested in is the posterior cingulate gyrus. And that's basically this thing that runs down the middle of the brain, but the one in
Mm-hmm.
the back. I call it the inner bully. When
Mm-hmm.
that one lights up on the scan,
Uh-huh.
it's just working really hard, and the person gets kind of like stuck in
Mm-hmm.
like looking at themselves excessively. And I mean like looking at themselves um like in a magnifying glass, like looking for perfection, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of negative self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they're obsessed with how they behave.
Wow.
There's also an argumentative and oppositional kind of component to the cingulate gyrus. So the
Uh-huh.
posterior is like if you're always arguing with yourself,
Yeah.
where the anterior is more, the one in the front is more with other people. So
Okay.
when you see people who have like low confidence, I always see that posterior cingulate gyrus just overworked. And then the
Wow.
anterior is fine. Like they're not really like arguing or being oppositional with other people. They're just
Uh-huh.
really with themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
I always use the visual or the analogy of like, those monks back in the 15th or 14th century where they would like whip themselves for their sins.
Mm.
So I tell them like you're kind of doing that
Wow.
psychologically or emotionally. Like you're
Hmm.
just, and then I kind of shifted that because I see a lot of younger people. So I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna use the monk thing. I'm like, it's like an inner bully.
Yeah, inner
You
bully.
get me?
Yeah,
It's
which
like an
that
inner
I
bully,
yeah.
you know? So then one of the cool things that we do is, first of all, we want to bring down activity in that part of the brain. So the
Hmm.
person just kind of goes with the flow a little bit more with themselves. So
Okay.
that's a big serotonin region. Serotonin is it's a neurotransmitter that
Hmm.
helps with a lot of like cyclical things.
Okay.
But then for that part, it kind of helps us kind of go with the flow, like
Yeah.
not worry too much or not care too much about that thought.
That's
So
a
let's say
great
if the
breakdown.
thought
Yeah.
was, what's that?
That was a great breakdown. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. So it's like
Yeah.
if let's say the thought is I'm dumb or I'm
Hmm.
stupid or I'm not good enough. That part of the brain, when it's lit up, they just get stuck on that. And they
Mm.
almost look for moments where they behave that way to kind of reassure that belief. I am dumb.
Wow.
That is true. You see, I made a mistake. I'm dumb. So
Mm.
what we try to do is like, okay, how do we bring down that part of the brain's activity?
Hmm.
Serotonin is one of them. And I always tell them, like, serotonin is made in the gut. So we
Hmm.
have to have good gut health. What are you
Okay.
eating? What are the foods that you're putting in your body? You know, is your gut healthy? You know,
Yeah.
um, and then the other part is, okay, well, we've done that with nutrition. We've done that with supplementation. Um, Exercise is a big one that increases
Hmm.
serotonin because it just becomes available for the brain. So it's made in the gut.
Yeah.
And I tell my patients, like, when you move, it goes to your brain where you need it. So what happens with people who have low self-esteem and kind of beat themselves up? They tend to have like depressive mood, anxiety type of disorders.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, most of these people hardly exercise.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
And
like they stay on that hamster wheel of not improving. So, by showing them on the scan, then they
hmm.
really own it and they're like, oh, okay, so that's my bully. I need to quiet that bully.
Hmm.
And then I tell them, like, these are the things I want you to do.
Yeah.
you know so in essence, that's one of the big areas for improving confidence.
Gotcha.
I might have made it a little bit more complicated than what it is,
No, that was
but
good.
it's
Yeah.
actually way more complicated than the way I said
Yeah.
it.
I'd imagine there's a lot more to that than just, yeah, what you had
Yeah.
said. Yeah. And I love that inner bully and silencing your inner bully because I think so many people unfortunately struggle with that.
Hmm.
And when you talk about that hamster wheel of, yeah, there's not much movement, you just staying in that same cycle
Hmm.
and having to say like you got to get out of that cycle. And you said something too with the gut health and serotonin and that correlation there. I don't know if very many people maybe have even heard that, but even know that to
Yeah.
be like a fact,
Right.
which is,
and
yeah.
and that's why we focus a lot on nutritional plans, exercise,
Hmm.
which is what I call the lifestyle modifications. Like, okay, we
Yeah.
need to change these behaviors that you're doing
Hmm.
because we got to get out of the hamster wheel. Now, sometimes you kind of have to like push them out of the hamster wheel because they get stuck in
Yeah.
it, you know?
Yeah.
And I always tell them, like, since that part of your brain also requires motivation and your motivation right now is on the floor,
Hmm.
let's stick to the discipline. Do it
Hmm.
because trust me, this is gonna work.
Yeah.
There's nothing else I can say, because they're not
Yeah.
they're not motivated.
Right.
But it's really cool because serotonin also helps with motivation. So once they start doing it, especially my
Hmm.
younger patients, and they're like, "Oh, I'm noticing that I do feel better after I exercise or I move or I do
Hmm.
some kind of sport."
Yeah.
Um, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's the serotonin that I was telling you about. Let's keep going."
Right. Yeah. That's so cool. The way you broke it down was, I think, great because if anybody needs to figure out some ways of just saying, how can I help myself in a practical way?
Right.
Obviously, there's way more to it when there's ongoing treatment and things like that and keeping people accountable. But this is huge for anyone that needs to just say like, hey, I have this negative self-talk, or I'm dealing with this inner bully, and how can I quiet it and increase or improve confidence, which is so huge for, I think, anyone.
Yeah. And that's mainly the lifestyle modifications and when I explain to them, but then you got to look at the psychotherapies.
Hmm.
look at things like cognitive behavioral,
Right.
EMDR, exposure therapies. Um, when the cingulate gyrus is very active, they tend to have very obsessional kinds of thinking
Mm,
about pretty much anything. It's just that if the one in the back is lit up, then they're obsessed with themselves and their feelings and how they treat themselves in their head.
mm,
But they can also have other obsessions and worries and
yeah.
ruminations. So then I'm like, okay, what have we been doing with your therapist?
Mm.
Most of them would tell me, oh, I don't go to therapy, or I went to therapy and it didn't work. I'm like,
Yeah.
you probably were not doing what you should have done.
Yeah.
Um, and then
Yeah.
the other piece is like if you go with the mindset, and I tell my patients this, if you go with the mindset like this is not going to work, it will not
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
you're not invested in it,
for sure.
you know. So there's a little bit of supportive psychotherapy that kind of, like I said, push the patient into like we got to do this. Come on,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But it's a balancing act in trying
Yeah.
to not motivate someone because I tell them like think of me as your brain coach. I want your
Hmm.
brain to work better. Think
Hmm.
of it like a muscle. Think of it like any other organ in your body.
Hmm.
And right now it's just not working well. And
Hmm.
if you do these things, it will start working better.
Hmm.
And then it's going to be easier for you to do the other things that are harder that I want you to do.
But
So
you
that's
got to
the cool
start
thing about,
somewhere.
right? You
Yeah.
got to start, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the cool thing about the scans is because it really allows me to create a tailored treatment plan um, when it comes to pretty much everything, including
Mm.
medications, supplements,
Mm.
nutraceuticals, psychotherapies, depending on the different patterns that I see sometimes, can also change the way I'm going to approach the person.
That totally makes sense too with understanding the brain instead of jumping to conclusions.
Hmm.
And even before we were talking a little bit about certain people might see behaviors and say, well, this person is just that type of person or this type. And then, but if you go deeper and you study and you look at the brain and see what's going on, that makes so much sense as to why we're going in the field, like in the field, and why it's pushing more towards this. Because before, I don't think people really wanted to take much time to actually look and see what's going on in the brain.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we are, and I say we as psychiatrists, like we're trained that way,
Hmm.
trained to follow a cluster of symptoms and say
Hmm.
this is this disorder, um, which is why when you focus on what the brain is doing, the the emphasis now is not on how can I check all these boxes for this disorder. It's more
Mm.
of like, well, the brain is behaving like this in these areas. How do we make them work better?
Gotcha.
And it's not so much centered. And there's one thing that I tell my patients: I'm not chasing a diagnosis.
Mm.
I know you want one, and some people do just
Right.
want to hear a diagnosis. And
Right.
then I'll go to the DSM-5 and like, okay, you meet criteria for this, this, and this. But then
Yeah.
let's really focus on this.
Mm.
This is what your brain is lacking in these regions. This part of your brain is a little sleepy. This is why you
Mm.
have attention and concentration and focus problems like ADHD.
Mm.
And you had a brain injury at some point. Do you remember? Wait, a brain injury? Yeah, you
Mm.
must have hit your head at some point.
Hmm.
Maybe when did you start having symptoms? So then you go back, like really go back into like, oh, I remember when I was one of my patients the other day, when I was 11, I
Hmm.
just, and the mom too, she's like, yeah, he drastically changed his behavior. Okay, what happened right before, or the year before, the 2 years before?
Hmm.
He had a huge stressor in his life. His dad had a major illness.
Mm.
So then now, as an 11-year-old, he started kind of freaking out.
Oh, okay.
So it became almost like a traumatic event, like a stressor.
Yeah.
And then immediately he went into substance use.
Wow.
So it's like, so you were, did you know? And then I always go, did you notice that you went towards downers,
Mm.
drugs that lower brain activity? Your limbic system
Mm.
is overactive, your emotional brain is overactive. So you went towards things that do that. like
Hmm.
alcohol,
Yeah.
like pot. So you were kind of self-medicating. So
Yeah.
now the mom is like, I don't have an addict. I don't have this bad kid that was always into
Yeah.
drugs. It's like, oh, he didn't know how to process his dad's illness.
Mm.
year old kid, and
Which then end up,
extremely anxious.
yeah. And he ended up coping in a
Right.
different way. Yeah.
In a
And
different way that was obviously not good for him. Um,
yeah.
so it enhances going back to like it really connects the the person that I'm treating with their family. There's
Hmm.
more compassion towards the person. There's more understanding. Um,
Yeah.
so that's one of the biggest things that is a big takeaway from whenever there's that kind of thing. And then I tell them like, you still look like you have a brain injury. Are you
Mm.
sure? Go back and start thinking. And then
Mm.
mom is like, oh yeah, that's when he started playing hockey.
Mm.
What do you mean? Yeah, he started playing hockey when he was 10.
Hmm.
He will get hit all the time. And then immediately mom is like, oh, he did have a major blow to the head and he lost consciousness.
Wow.
So
And
it
you
becomes
start
this
putting
like,
yeah, the
yeah, and
pieces
then
to the puzzle.
the family starts putting the pieces together, like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
you know, which
I'm
is
cu-
cool.
yeah, I'm curious too when you had mentioned about you ask people, have you ever had a traumatic experience or
Mhm.
stressor, and then they say no, and then you go, you told me earlier, you say, are you sure? And you said that's one of the things that you enjoy kind of seeing, wait a minute, that's not what your brain is showing here.
Yeah.
What with that process, and when you all find that out, is the like kind of uncovering of that, is that the aha moment for the client? And also, is there a huge or strong correlation with trauma and like either whether we call it a brain illness
Hmm.
or what? I know those are different questions,
Yeah.
but
Well, I'll answer this last one indefinitely.
okay.
Um, when I have the patients that, and I see a lot of those, we call it a diamond pattern. Um,
Mm,
and when we see the diamond pattern, um, it's usually most of the time associated with some kind of emotional or psychological abuse.
mm,
So I have many reactions. One is the
mm-hmm,
person that I know I had it, my ex was a big, abuser. He used to
mm-hmm,
call me XYZ. I'm no longer in that relationship. So it makes sense why I still have that.
yeah.
Right. I'm like, okay. Then there's the person that are like, how did you know? Because they never
Mm,
told us in the history.
yeah. Wow.
And then and to me, those are the cool moments where the brain scans are extremely helpful for psychiatrists
Yeah.
who are completely missing out on diagnosing things like PTSD.
Mm,
And those people usually come with a list of diagnoses. I always say PTSD is like a Pandora's box.
yeah.
Anything can come out.
Wow.
Anxiety, depression, bipolar, psychosis, like extreme stress can come out in the symptoms. And the person has multiple diagnoses. And
Yeah.
no one is really treating the trauma.
Mm,
And they have never treated the trauma. So then
right.
that's that other part. And then the other type of patient that I get is, I don't know what you're talking about. I
Oh,
don't
wow.
remember anything.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you one story that
Sure.
is one of those people. So I had a gentleman who came, he was in his early 70s. He
Mm-hmm,
really came to us because he was having problems sleeping
mm-hmm,
his whole life, couldn't sleep, taken multiple medications for sleep. None of them worked. To
mm,
me, that's a big, like, that's a trauma response. Most
mm.
traumatic people or people who have experienced stressors don't want to sleep because that's a very vulnerable place to be. So you give
Wow.
them some kind of sedative for sleep, they like fight it internally because they need to
Wow.
feel alert.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, we're not going to go that route because that's
Yeah.
useless. So to me, that's already like, I think this is happening. But
Yeah.
then I show him the scan. I'm like, dude, you've had some kind of stressor. There's another
Mm-hmm,
pattern that's in the shape of a triangle, um, where it's more related to experiences that you saw and you witnessed,
mm,
some kind of physical abuse, an assault, something like
mm-hmm,
that. And I'm like, I know you don't remember. And those people always tell me, well, there's a period in my life that I have no memories.
Mm,
Like from 8 to 12, I don't remember much.
mhm.
Okay, so that's another flag for you've experienced some kind of big stressor.
Yeah.
Now, in that moment where I'm going over these things with them, it's not my job to investigate
Mm,
because it can actually trigger the person when they try
okay.
to bring it back to the from their memory. So I said, no,
Mhm.
no, no, let's do therapies. So this guy, I sent him to therapy, and I told him, let's do EMDR.
Mm.
And like, first of all, what is that? So I explained to him what EMDR is, and I have a whole blog post about EMDR and also about the inner bully.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah, for sure.
I never saw him again. I was
What?
This guy was probably this guy's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm just here for sleep. Give me something because I'm not sleeping.
Wow.
But he returned like 6 months later, and
Uh-huh.
he was like, "Doctor, you were 100% right." Um, so I went to EMDR like you told me. I've been
Mm,
doing X number of sessions, and we discovered that when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I was in a public bathroom, and I a man was gonna come and I guess touch him or something, but it
mm,
never happened. But what did
mm.
happen was his dad came in and beat, this
Oh,
man
wow.
up,
Yeah.
bloody and all. This 7-year-old saw all of that.
Wow.
So going back, in one of the visits, he told me, I don't pee during the day. I only pee at night, which is why it's keeping him up from sleeping.
Wow.
And I'm like, you don't pee during the day ever?
Right.
He's like,
Yeah.
I used to pee in my house. Now I don't even like use the bathroom in my house either. I'm like, okay, that's when I told him that time, like, okay, this is definitely some kind of stressor.
Yeah.
Something happened. So then that's when he came back and he told me the story. He's like, that's what the stressor was.
Mm.
So I saw him, he continued EMDR. I saw him in the next follow up. He's like, Doctor, he was so happy. He's like, I'm peeing in my house.
Oh, wow.
He's
Yeah.
like, I feel safe.
Yeah.
I'm not
Wow.
afraid. And I
Mm.
didn't think, he's like, I didn't make that connection until you put that in my head as like, we need to investigate
Yeah.
because this, you see how it creates this trickle effect.
Yes.
And like this, I'm sure there's lots of people with fears, um, things that they're not doing, and is
Hmm.
usually linked to some kind of stressor.
Yeah.
They just never made the connection.
Yeah.
Uh, and they've kind of lived their life that way. So, here we have this 70-year-old person, his whole life since very young age, were not he never peed in a public bathroom for
Mm.
many years, and then he started not doing it in his home. So then he would do it at night.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is so crazy.
And
And
the
I
brain
mean,
still kind of keeps it in there, you know.
right. It stores it, and then you just kind of you go through life just thinking like, yeah, this is how I am. This is, like you're almost adapting in a way to like survival mode,
Hmm.
but you're not. And there it goes. I mean, just hearing him when you said he's like, I feel safe now.
Right.
Like those are those revolutionary statements that you get and you go, wow, like that person, they have the breakthrough now.
And then we don't realize that if you leave that in there, like just not or cooking, right? I always think of it as like, you have a wound, you put a band-aid
Yeah.
on many years ago, and now it's just rotting. You haven't really like
Mm,
healed that band-aid.
mm,
Um, I tell them like anytime you have a stressor, any kind of stressor, a stressor at work,
mm,
your relationship, your kids, whatever. It's like if that wound, I like pressed it. So the
mm.
symptoms come out again,
Wow.
Another patient like that, every July and August, she becomes manic, extremely anxious. So we
Uh-huh.
recently discovered that it was during those months she had major losses in her life years ago.
Mm,
So I'm like, well, every time you go into that time of the year, it's like I'm pressing on top of that wound that hasn't healed.
mm.
So we got to remove the band-aid. And
Yeah.
that's psychotherapy. And then I
Mm,
tell them, like, hey, while we're removing the band-aid, it's gonna hurt, but it's
yeah.
not gonna hurt as much as leaving that wound in there rotting.
Yeah.
We got to remove it so we can actually heal it.
Yeah.
And then they start understanding it. They start also forgiving themselves
Mm,
because going back to the confidence thing, you start kind of beating yourself down. It's like, well, I'm never gonna get better. This is who
Right.
I'm this bad person, or
Yeah.
I'm this dumb person, or I'm
Yeah.
stupid, or whatever, you know? And people live their lives for a long time like that
Yeah.
without making a correlation with like, well, that was a stressor you had.
Exactly. Because
When
sometimes, yeah. Go ahead. I didn't mean to
no, no,
interrupt.
it was just that like there was a
Yeah.
stress that was never really processed properly.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it goes along with even people thinking like some parts of trauma is like normal. Like when you think of like certain people that have experienced trauma or abuse and things, and I think like, well, that's a part of life. Like I've just gone, that was a part of something that I just, you know, thought was okay. Or that everybody goes through that kind of stuff, and then they go along in life without ever addressing it. And finally, like you said, even with the 70-year-old client, he's processing it way later.
mhm.
And I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
No, no, I'm curious. Sorry.
No, no. I'm curious with, if somebody is like maybe from a cultural background
Hmm.
that it's like, well, we don't talk about those things. We don't go to the doctor. We don't go to a therapist or a psychiatrist. How do we break those barriers, especially being in the Latino community as well?
Yeah, that's where you see that the most, the
Mm,
brushing it under the rug. Um,
right.
and then we have this like 30, 40-year old that has had extreme anxiety his whole life,
Yeah.
and it was never really addressed. Um,
Hmm.
I see that a lot. Um, I see that in my patients with Hispanic backgrounds where being treated that way is the norm.
Mm,
Um, and the one patient that I just comes to mind right now is um, he was always talked down upon
hmm.
by his dad.
Mm,
So he noticed that one of his scary people, and I say, okay, you always we always have scary people and then safe
hmm.
people. Who
Yeah.
would you say is one of those scary people right now? Tell me the name. And immediately he's like, my dad. I'm like, okay.
Mm,
So then there's something there. And this person is very successful in his career, but he
mm.
always talks down to himself.
Wow.
And then when I show him his scan, obviously he had a diamond pattern. I'm like, maybe there's something there. How do you
Mm,
behave with your coworkers? How do you behave with your partners? How do you behave with the people around you?
hmm.
Like I always push myself down because I was always taught like that.
Wow.
That's how it is. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be. And
Right.
clearly there's a stressor there that you haven't really processed and you haven't healed it. And you
Yeah.
have to, because sometimes we also have to just forgive that person so I can move on.
Right.
Right. And sometimes that's, that that's not as easy as it sounds. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot more to that, forgiving the person that has hurt us. But there needs to be part of the healing process for you to
Hmm.
now not put so much emphasis or power on that person and bring it back to you. And that's
Hmm.
what I mean about sometimes we have to either heal by forgiving or letting that person go out of my head.
Yeah.
So then I
That's
can
so
really
good.
focus on giving myself the power. And then
Hmm.
it goes back down to the confidence,
Yeah.
you know? Because if I don't view myself how my dad viewed me, because he's a Latino and he talks like that, and that's how he
Yeah.
is,
Hmm.
and that's how all my friends' parents treated them.
Hmm.
So that's normal. So fast forward, he's in his
Hmm.
40s. Now he's coming to us because he's having sleep issues, extreme burnout, stress, anxiety, and he doesn't know why that's happened.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, okay, I see a correlation here,
Uh,
and you're behaving how your dad would talk to you.
mm,
I mean, he had the inner bully on fire.
right.
um,
Yeah.
and when I told him that, he was like, "Wow, like that's true."
Hmm.
I do talk to myself like that.
Hmm.
So they're like, okay, so now you bring insight, and now you can go towards healing. Um, but yeah, in the Latino community, this is a big one. We don't go to the psychiatrist. Eso para los locos. That's for the crazy people.
Right.
And I tell them, I'm
Exactly.
like, well, I don't treat those symptoms really. I hardly
Yeah.
treat
Yeah.
I usually treat anxiety, depression, and trauma.
Mm.
So that's what I have. And why did
Yeah.
you go? And I always say, like, you're not going to come to me for your OBGYN needs.
Yeah.
You're going to come to me for whatever your brain is doing and is
Yeah.
changing your behavior and affecting
Mhm.
you in a negative way. That's why you go to the psychiatrist. But there's a lot to learn, I think, from our, um, I guess, American family. They
Yeah.
are more receptive than Latinos.
Yeah.
I think we are coming around. A lot of
Hmm.
more people in the media are speaking up about their brain health issues and how they're getting treatment and doing therapy.
Yeah.
I think it was Sandra Bullock that in an interview she talked about EMDR, and then suddenly
Mm.
started talking about EMDR, and
Wow.
I'm like, okay, great.
Yeah.
In social media too, a lot of
Yeah.
people are talking about it, and what I'm trying to do is bring a lot of this information to the Latino community because we're just not informed this way, you know?
Definitely. Yeah, and that's huge innovative work because I also know that so many times, even within the culture, it's about work, 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 work. You
Mhm.
pass out, work, work,
Right.
like burnout, right? And there's no sense of like, sometimes people say, well, there is no such thing as balance with work and rest and health, but it's like there's got to be somewhere
Yeah. No, you need
because
you need the balance. You have to. And part
exactly.
of my treatment, I always put the fun. What are you doing for fun?
Mm, boom. There it
And then
is.
they're like, I go out to eat with my wife. I'm like, okay, well,
Exactly.
that's fun, but
Yeah.
we got
Yeah.
to do something else. Remember when we were kids that we had recess? Remember when we
Mm,
were kids and that's when our brain was like developing the most? We were learning things.
hmm.
Now we're adults, we're doing a job. Now we think that like that's it, the learning and the fun is over.
Yeah.
No, your brain
Exactly.
needs to be protected from things like dementia. And one of
Mm,
the big protector against dementia is learning new things.
wow.
So if we can learn new things always, but then sprinkle in the fun like we did when we were kids,
Yeah.
you have brain optimization, which is one of my biggest passions. Like we got to get
Yeah.
the brain working better as opposed to just aging with negative things later on in life, like dementia, you know?
So good. I love the brain optimization because I think it's so important for us to understand that we got to take care of ourselves. And if we want to prevent certain things from happening later on in life, we got to start doing things now
Mm-hmm.
to take care of ourselves. But so many people talk about like I gotta know how to perform. I gotta perform. I gotta be able to do this, do that, And it's like, well, how do you optimize that? Well, you're hearing it firsthand from Dr. Hector. There's a balance there too, but there's also things that you do where you learn new things, but you put fun in there too, and you also take care of yourself physically because that's huge in all of this as well.
Right. Yeah, brain optimization. And I have a small group of patients that's what they come to Amen clinics for.
Mm,
And funny is a lot of them are huge like people in their industry, they're
yeah.
executives. Um,
Uh-huh.
they're into productivity, they're into enhancing their function.
Gotcha.
So I always tell them, like, okay, productivity doesn't equal more work. Productivity means
Yeah.
I can do a lot more with either less time and less effort. So
Mm,
then I have time for the fun.
that's good.
Doesn't mean now I get to just, oh, all these things that I can do to optimize my brain. Now I can take on more work and more stressors. Like, no, 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 no. This is, we want your brain to work better so you can do more with less
Mm,
effort.
that's so
And
good.
then you have time for the fun because you need
Yeah.
the fun, you know?
Right.
Um, so that's one of the things of a series that I'm doing for 2025 workshops on how to
Cool.
optimize the brain and how to improve different qualities that we want to have,
Yeah.
like confidence, being compassionate,
Mm.
being driven.
Yeah.
Like these are all qualities that I think a lot of people want to improve.
Hmm.
Self-confidence is also one of them. Um, and what can I do because my brain is in charge of those functions? Because it's the
Right.
organ that does that, you
Yeah.
know. Um, so let's do that. Let's take care of our brain in a way that those qualities that we want to have that are amazing, right?
Hmm.
Um, being driven, having confidence.
Yeah.
Um, how can I do that? No one teaches us how to do that.
Right.
Just think that some people are like that and some people are not. And
Yeah.
honestly, the difference is what their brain is doing. So it's like
Mm.
if all these people are so driven and motivated and have this like confidence like there's no tomorrow, how come some people don't?
Mm.
And I see it all the time with their brain scans and the patterns that are lighting up. So then I'm like, okay, we got to turn this off. We got to light this up. This part of your brain is sleepy. This
I
needs
like that.
dopamine. Let's enhance dopamine because it's going to give
Mm.
this. So it's really cool what's happening in the world of psychiatry. Um,
Hmm.
is not just about there is a problem with this person, so let's
Yeah.
make it better. I mean, yeah, this person is experiencing certain symptoms
Right.
that are debilitating. Well, there's a lot of people that just want to enhance their brain and make it younger.
Mm.
So then let's do it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. That's such that's so good. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that in 2025 as well, and just the innovative work that you're doing, the awesome insights that you have. I mean, hopefully we could get a part two of this eventually. That would be cool if we
Yeah,
could we could do
definitely.
that. Yeah, and I also want to respect your time, doctor, but I want to give you an opportunity to just share anything else in just stuff that you've done, published work, or your Instagram, your website as well for listeners to be able to tune in, and any last recommendations or anything.
Well, I mean, I think the big one is first of all, you got to love your brain,
Mm,
right? This is the organ that controls everything else,
yeah,
including our thoughts, our personality. I mean, that's what it does, you know?
right.
You got to love it. You got to take care of it. And if
Hmm.
you're putting stuff in your body that is hurting your brain, you're
Hmm.
in essence hurting who you are, hurting your personality, hurting
Hmm.
how you're making decisions, all that stuff. So
Hmm.
that's a big one. And
Yeah.
then, when it comes to like, for like I said, for 2025, I'm focusing a lot on improving and enhancing these qualities that we all want to have.
Yeah.
Um, and every month, I'm going to be launching a different workshop for those themes. Um, and a lot of it obviously is in my blog. You go to drhector.com,
Okay.
and on there, I'll be doing a lot of kind of like summaries of the workshops. And I'll be putting on
Okay.
there how people can register for the workshops. We're going to be doing a free sessions here and there um, to kind of start giving this idea and people to start understanding it and educating ourselves into how our brain can actually do that. So
Awesome.
that'll be launched a lot in my I'll be talking about it in my Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, because believe it or not, a lot of these people are really heavy on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah,
They're
for
they're
sure.
driven. They want to improve their productivity and functioning in their career. So that's another one.
Okay.
But those are the big things that I have going on, and I'm very excited. 2024 was about building resilience with my
Mm,
patients who have experienced trauma.
hmm.
So if you go to my Instagram, all of my content was mainly on let's build resilience. So the hashtag was you got this.
Awesome.
And I always
Yeah.
gonna have that because I think
Yeah.
we are missing that piece
Hmm.
where and I've seen it a lot with therapists where they kind of get focused only on the trauma and
Mm,
not like giving the patients tools to like face other stressors and gain and improve their resilience. That's a
yeah.
big one. So, but for 2025, I'm more about brain optimization. How do we get these areas working better so
Yeah.
we love our brain better and and make it work better for us.
Cool. That's awesome. Looking forward to hearing more about that in 2025. And again, thank you so much for tuning in, taking time out of your busy schedule to come on and share such awesome insights and your expertise with listeners. This was an awesome chat that we had. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, for those that are listening, we will be back next week. But until then, listen to this episode, like, share, subscribe, and also go follow Dr. Hector on Instagram and all the other venues, as well as check out his website. He's got some awesome insights, and I'm excited to hear more about what he's going to be doing in this next year.